Hello, welcome to this quick video which will show you how to create a batch of samples within Qualoupe. So this is my Qualoupe home screen with the Favourites tab, and I've got Batch, Results by Method and Sample Manager as favourite applications showing here. So I'm going to click on Batch Manager to launch it. It opens up in a blank screen, so I'm going to dive straight in and click on New Record to create a new batch. As the little yellow bar tells you, enter the details, then click Save Changes. So I don't actually have to put any information in this at all. If I was to click on Save Changes, it will create me a blank batch with an automatically generated batch ID. I shall create another one though. So there are other information that you can put in here. So for example, if my customer has supplied me with a reference number for the samples they've sent, I might like to enter it in here, so I'll put in ref 001. Similarly, if I know in advance what the material is going to be that I'm testing, I can select that from a list of materials in the system. This is demo data, so the list's a bit restricted, but we'll have that one. Obviously that material has only got one specification because that's automatically populated. If it had more than one, you could select the unique spec. We can put in the customer, so I'll select that customer. If I click on the contact below, I'm selecting the contact for that customer record, so we'll select him. There's a submitter over here. This is the internal contact, so from your Qualoupe users. So I'm logged in as admin, so we'll choose Qualoupe administrator. Now there's other things I could put in here. I could select or enter a batch type. You can put in due date, expiry date. I can look up projects. I can enter an amount, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. So we've got the material, me, the customer, and the customer contact. Oh, and our reference. So if I save the changes now, my batch ID is automatically generated. Now, in the bottom part of the screen, we can create samples. You'll notice there's a bar that separates the top and the bottom, and if I hover the mouse on that, I can drag that up. It just gives me a little bit more space at the bottom to see what's going on there. You can always scroll here to see all your batch details. So I'm going to add some samples. So add. It opens up a form, and in this form we can enter our sample details. So material, spec, customer, class, etc. If they'd been populated in the batch details, they'd populate through to here. As it is, the bits of information such as material that I've put in, they've populated through. And I can edit the amount of samples I'm going to add. So let's add 20 samples, and if I click on add, it quickly adds 20 sample rows. They're highlighted, and the material and spec are in bold and italics because it hasn't yet created these sample records. This is just what it's going to create. So if I click on Save Changes, the samples get created, and as you can see now they've gone back to not being highlighted and the sample IDs have actually been generated. I can have a look at the details for these samples either by scrolling across to look at what information I have stored in here, or if I want to look at an individual sample more closely, I can highlight that sample, right mouse click, and a little menu pops up from which I select Open Linked Record Details. And this opens the sample manager in its own tab, and here's that sample information, so I can see the methods, results entry, that sort of thing. So back in the batch manager, I might want to receive these samples. You can see they've all been created at status N, which means the Qualoupe record has been created, but the samples haven't yet reached the lab for analysis. But if we created this batch when we receive the samples, we might want to set the status to receive straight away. So I'm going to select them all. You'll notice we've got buttons here. I can say all, none. I can hold down Control, I can hold down Shift and select bunches of them, but I'm just going to say all. Click on the Receive button and save my changes. If I highlight a sample row and go to this section here, deals with methods, so if I go to Edit, I didn't need to highlight one actually, but if I highlight them in there, it will show me the methods that are on these samples. It's actually the same for every sample in here because we've created it using the material template. So if I highlight 136 and click on Add, and I'm going to choose all methods, let's have fat, and save. If I then go to Edit, and in here I highlight 136, you can see this sample has got fat on it as well. If I go 135, 137, it's just the two from the specification. So you can see quite a lot of the sample details in here, and you can add and delete and view the methods. I might decide I want to add some more samples to this batch, so I can click on Add again, and same screen again. If we go to this tab, Existing Samples, it shows me a list of samples in the system that aren't attached to a batch. There aren't that many of them in this system, but actually, so I could attach one of these. So if I say, I'll just select that one and add, that's now associated that sample. It's gone to the top of the list. It's associated that sample to the batch. If I click on Add again, I can add new samples. This time I'm not going to specify the number of samples I want. I'm going to create the samples from a list of references. So in here I can type or paste in a list of sample references. So if your customer sent you their own IDs to identify the individual samples that they sent you, you might have a list of references in an email or accompanying documentation, and you might want to type these in. So I'm going to put some in here. I'm just typing them in, very imaginatively named as well. Ref 005. Okay, so I've added some references. So if I click on Continue, the number of samples here is the same as the number of references I typed in. So I'm going to click on Add, and these are the rows it's going to add, and if you look along here you can see the reference column has been populated with the values I typed in. So if I click on Save Changes, it's added my new samples, so I can then highlight the first one, the last one, and receive them. So hopefully this has been enough of a quick look at the batch manager to get you started with creating a batch and adding samples. I've added 20 samples, 1 sample, and then 7, but you should be able to add hundreds of samples at a time, and this is where it becomes a great time saver to save you creating the same sample multiple times. You can add a whole load all in one go. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope it was helpful.